Thank you for watching this, my first YouTube video on this YouTube channel. So the topic of this YouTube video today is strictly about getting started. Some of you may have heard the term analysis paralysis. What are those things that keep us from doing something? I tell you, right now is the perfect example of everything that could have possibly gotten in the way of starting this video has happened. All the way from self-talk and why I'm not worthy or interesting enough to start a YouTube video channel, to the lighting in this space and the reasons that have become excuses not to even launch into a project such as this one. So finally, I realized this morning that many things throughout life that have served me well, when just getting started or taking that first step was all that was needed. Consider that I am starting this from a real simple and basic outline that should give me or allow me to think about the content that I'll be using to fill in the blanks as I go along. For example, I'm going to put the outline up on the screen for you so you can see it. This outline wants to cover the topic analysis paralysis, done is better than perfect, walking into your fear, what's on the other side, and that would be the other side of fear, and putting a deadline on it. The good old slogan, just do it by Nike. So I'll go back to a little bit of the beginning as I was processing what to talk about that might make me somewhat relative or relatable to you in your journey. I'm going to go back to when I was, and I'm thinking with you right now, I think I'll pick this time. I'll go back to when I was 18 years old. I was living in Miami, Florida. And on a certain night, I decided that I wanted to go clubbing. So I drive myself to a nightclub called Stefano's in Key Biscayne. I go into Stefano's. This was during a period of my life. I grew up as a chubby kid, always trying to get the attention of girls. And because I was chubby, I wasn't getting that attention. And this is a whole other topic for another video. But at this point, I had lost a lot of weight and I was feeling confident. I was looking good. And I went to the club, and all of a sudden I find myself dancing with this one girl while another girl was looking at me, and being this guy, I decided that, well, if I'm dancing with a pretty girl, the prettier girl wanted to dance with me, why not go dance with her? And I politely excused myself and moved on and started dancing with the other girl, who happened to be a few years older than me. I think she was like 23, I was 18. And fast forward, without analysis paralysis, within 2 weeks, I moved in with her and lived in New York City in Midtown Manhattan, because we kind of fell for each other, and it was exciting. And she obviously didn't have a clue how old I was. She was a stockbroker in Wall Street, and but this led me to New York. And it was that ability of walking into a different place, somewhere I'd never been, not even thinking about it, allowed me down this journey that I've been on. Lived in New York for a long time. A lot of things happened while I was there. I, you know, took on all kinds of jobs. You know, I literally pounded the pavement. She wasn't going to support me. Good for her. So I had to go out there and figure it out. I must have had 5 or 6 different jobs while I was in New York City. You know, I don't have a formal education. I dropped out of school in the 10th grade. For those of you who know me, I've had a lot of success in life, and you probably would think that I have a formal education, but I am strictly self-taught. I dropped out of school in Miami, Florida, first semester of the 10th grade. And it wasn't because I was smart or bright, it was because of dysfunctionalities at home that forced me to figure it out and go out and live on my own when I was about 16 years old. So that's another story for another podcast. So I'm trying to stay with the topic and the theme of just doing it and getting started. So in New York, if one thing didn't work, I would just continuously pivot and just move on to the next thing, and to the next thing, and to the next thing, at which point, fast forward a couple of years, I was at a place where I was exposed to acting school. I was exposed to some commercial modeling because I was still holding my weight down and feeling good and looking pretty good, and I can do commercial modeling. Unlike my peers that were tall, leaner, they had the 8-packs, they can do more of the runway and the real high-end, high-profile modeling. I was doing more in the commercial space. 5'9" guy has no place on a runway. So with that being said, things weren't moving fast enough for me. I can see that type of fame and fortune was not happening. So I decided that it was time to leave New York and do something else. One of my roommates suggested that I stop and visit Napa Valley before heading back to Miami and throwing in the towel. And I thought, what the heck, let's just do that. I go to I go to Napa Valley. How weird that in 1987, when Napa Valley was a thing, but not the thing that it is now, not the world-class destination that it is now, I happened to fall into a place called Napa Valley. Shortly after that, because of the lack of planning and the lack of preparing, I meet the love of my life. I see a girl while I was working for a construction company at this point, running heavy equipment. I see a girl, and the minute I see her, I thought, that's who I want to marry. And that's where I put all my focus and my intention towards. And here we are. It's going to be 35 years in April. So that happened without planning, preparing. By the way, we were married within 6 months of meeting each other. What happens next? Next is, Susan had 2 real tiny children when we met. Those are my 2 oldest kids. And then we have 2 more. So we have a total of 4 children. And it was time to make sure that I was supporting and helping support those children. So I was as I've said, I was in construction. I was running heavy equipment. That pays really well in California. However, what I didn't realize is that with the rains and the weather changing, you're out of work the minute the rain hits the soil. Heavy equipment doesn't do well in soil. So coming home one day, I looked on the side of the street and I see a fruit stand, and the fruit stand was pretty busy. And I get out and I buy some peaches, and I start to realize that the produce in California is unlike anything I've ever had. These peaches were the sweetest peaches I've ever had. The tomatoes, you can literally eat them like if they were peaches or apples. And I was blown away by that. And as I drove away, I thought, this is probably around 1990 or 1989. I thought, I bet you that guy makes enough money to survive every day and he's happy. So I had $300 in my bank account. I got home with 4 kids at home and I told my wife, I'm going to leave my $25 an hour job with full benefits to go buy a load of produce at the produce market because I'm going to start selling produce on the side of the road. No planning, no preparing, just do it. Of course, my wife and I literally went from that conversation to marriage counseling. And we met the most interesting psychologist I've ever met, who seemed to be the most honest and to the point person I've ever met in that field. And he looked at Susan and she said, "Do you love him?" She said, "Yes." "Do you want to stay with him?" She said, "Yes." And all he said to her was, "Then get ready, because it's going to be a lumpy ride." And I feel bad for that today, because I didn't even know what he was talking about. I knew that he was siding with me, so that made my ego feel good. But I had no idea what I'd put her through based on that personality trait of just do it. However, I went and bought my load of produce. $300 worth of produce. I come home the next day. I set up a tent on a busy street, just like you see people out there selling apples and oranges. I did the full spread. I had peaches, I had apples, I had oranges, I had strawberries, to quickly realize that if I didn't sell them all today, they were probably bad within the next 24 hours or not worthy of putting on a stand the next 24 to 48 hours. So what that made me realize is that I better go door to door and get rid of this produce to recover my initial investment. I'm going to fast forward that story 8 years. That moment of not thinking, of just doing, allowed me to support my family in the way that they were not used to for 8 years. The first couple of years were brutal. But we got to a place where we were selling over $20 million a year worth of produce, a warehouse in the San Francisco produce market, and 2 retail stores, which, by the way, I'd never do retail again. That I'll probably leave for another video. But realize that not even thinking about it, just going into it and learning as I did was what got us traction and allowed us to experience vacations, trips to great locations and destinations. And our kids grew up with so much more than I've ever had. That leads me fast forward when that business was something that I had to walk away from through mismanagement, through not knowing what I didn't know, through just another failure. It led me into the real estate business. The real estate business, I jumped in with no sphere, no database. I didn't know anybody really in Napa Valley because I was always on a piece of heavy equipment. I wasn't doing a lot in the way of networking. Then I go to produce. Produce was in San Francisco. That's an hour away. I wasn't building a sphere in Napa. So then I go into real estate. And what was interesting was that within a month of having my license, I had closed 3 transactions. Again, went into real estate without thinking about it. I just did it. And from there, I found myself selling over 100 homes per year over year, because of learning while I was doing, just doing. Bought real estate, investment properties, developed a way to create passive income. And it's just learning while you're doing is the message that I'm trying to drive home for most people, is start doing, start learning. What's happening with this video right now, this is another one of those opportunities for me to start doing and start learning. This is the first one. It doesn't look that good. I have no idea what I'm doing. The lighting is weird. I'm actually in a tiny little room that looks like a college dorm at a place called True North Health, where I'm just here to help reset myself and visit some of these fantastic doctors here who believe in a better way of eating and nurturing your body. Tomorrow will be 8 weeks since I started on an SOS-free journey. SOS-free means no sugar, no oil, no salt. And I'm happy to report that today, in a day under 8 weeks, I've lost 40 pounds. And that activity was a just do it moment for me. Zero analysis paralysis. I didn't go halfway. I went all the way. Now I realized that the struggle, as with many of my yo-yos, because I've gone up and down in weight my entire life, is in living this way forever. For some people, the idea of not having oil or eating salt or eating sugar would make it for a miserable life. I assure you that one of the things I want to promise is that what's on the other side of the fear of what you're going to miss out, it is incredible. So talking about that, what's on the other side is one of the things that I want you to visualize when you're thinking of doing something new. When you may be a little stuck in analysis paralysis and preparing to get ready, and everything has to be just right. I learned from a friend. I learned, I'm going to re-say this as many times as I have to, and I'm going to have you suffer through the pain of my suffering, of making mistakes and not editing once. A friend of mine said to me, done is better than perfect. And if you are watching, you know who you are. Thank you for saying that to me, because that really confirmed and reaffirmed that what I've been doing so far is right. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to start. You have to start doing, and you learn as you do. 5 years ago, I told my wife that I wanted to hike the John Muir Trail. That is 200 plus miles within the 20-something hundred miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. What John Muir said was that these 200 and something miles were the most beautiful part of the Pacific Crest Trail, hence this was called the John Muir Trail. What I saw on that trip could only be described by a wordsmith like John Muir. I can't even express it. The photos don't do it justice. But what I'm here to tell you about that trip, that I wouldn't encourage anybody to do it my way. But for me, it was a just do it moment. Susan asked me, my wife Susan said, how long are you going to prepare for that trip? One of the things that I'm concerned about is your physical, she didn't want to say your fat, but I was about 40, 50 pounds heavier than I am now. And I told her, I said, I'd probably take a month to prepare to get in better shape to go do the trip. As I was processing that, within the next 24 to 48 hours, I called Susan, I said, I'm leaving in 3 days. So that was a full 5 days to get ready for such a trip. I looked at a few videos, learned a few things. I packed a suitcase, I packed a backpack. Backpack ended up being around 62 pounds. And those 62 pounds, plus the weight I was carrying, made it as if I was carrying a 240 pound person on my back. Susan, Jerry Jr., my daughter Alana, dropped me off at the trailhead. And I remember my son distinctly saying, hey, Dad, one foot in front of the other. As I walked away with tears in my eyes, walking into the abyss of the unknown, solo, into what I had no idea was coming next. One thing that I figured out quickly, besides the fact that the pack was like walking on the moon. The first part of the trail was diverted because of a fire at Yosemite. I had to take if anybody has done any part of this hike, there is a trail called, I think it's called Happy Isles, or Happy, God, it's winter or snow or something. Happy, I'll have to pull it up. But what Happy Isles was a 2-mile climb with, I want to say, something like 120 switchbacks going up this thing. As I was watching on Half Dome, people being airlifted because the fires were keeping people from being able to get down from Half Dome. But I was on, I think, Happy Isles doing these 120 switchbacks, 40 to 60 pounds overweight with a 60-pound pack, and not knowing if I was going to make it all the way to the 2-mile climb on this part of the trail to get up to a place I can set a tent to rest and recover for the next day. So I make it. I remember that there were times on that hike that I would take literally 5 steps and rest. 5 steps and rest. What I didn't realize is that when I woke up on the next morning, I felt just a little better. That sleep was probably the best sleep I've had in my life. I slept so soundly that a bear wouldn't have woken me up. I was just so exhausted. So then the next day, I hike for about another 8 hours, and I end up somewhere in Yosemite where I meet a group of people. And the person that stood out the most was a 16 or 17-year-old young lady who started on the Pacific Crest Trail somewhere in, I want to say she started somewhere in Truckee, which is in towards Lake Tahoe. So she had already put in, I want to say, several hundred miles, and she was on her way on the Pacific Crest Trails to Mexico, the southernmost part of the Pacific Crest Trail. And when she saw my pack, she literally asked me to unpack the whole backpack, and she would tell me what was essential and what I could get rid of. The experience I got from that 17-year-old person at that moment made me realize that we can't do things alone and that we need each other. She helped me take my pack from 60 plus pounds to the low 20s, which on the following day, I took that pack all the way down to 16 pounds. And by that point, that was day 3, I was already at a point in Yosemite where I can make sure that I was able to get rid of things. I was able to readjust. I was able to, there was satellite there so I can text my family, or I have cell reception there. I had satellite the whole time, so I prepared for that. But I tell you, I learned so much from that person, and then other people that I would meet along the trail would continue to feed me information. So I kept learning as I was doing. By day 3 or 4, I was putting in 15 to 18 miles a day. On my best day, I put in close to 25 miles. I did this trip in 17 days. And what I have to share with you, what came out of that trip was a lifelong memory that will never leave me, and life lessons that I could have never picked up anywhere else that could have been entirely affected by analysis paralysis, or making sure that everything's just right before you take the first steps. So the one thing that I would encourage you to do, the last thing I would encourage you to do when you're thinking and you're processing that you want to do something cool, epic, or life-changing, is put a deadline on it. This video has a deadline on it. I know when it has to go out. And the one person that I'm honestly and truthfully accountable to is me, because I'm the only one I cannot fool. fool everybody else. I can tell everybody I'm gonna get it done. I'm gonna get it done by Tuesday. Tuesday comes and goes. Oh, I'm gonna get it done by next Tuesday. You can tell people. People buy that. The question is, do we buy that? I don't believe we buy that. I hope you liked watching this. I hope it meant something. I hope it helps you in any way to get unstuck if you find yourself stuck in any way. And this is literally the first of what should be many to come videos. And as we go through them, hopefully you see the continuous improvement in not only the videos, but in me as a human being who's literally just trying a little bit at a time to get a little bit better every day. Thanks.